Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marchegiani here. We're going to be chatting about the top 5 low dopamine symptoms. This is the topic I get quite frequently, talking about neurotransmitters and how it affects mood, energy, focus, etc. Before we do, please smash that like button, really helps with the search algorithm. Put your comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on today's topic. All right, so let's dive in. What is dopamine? Dopamine's a neurotransmitter. So neurotransmitters are basically these chemicals that help conduct that neurological signal from the pre to a postsynaptic neuron. So a presynaptic neuron looks like this, your postsynaptic neuron looks like this, and you have this synaptic cleft, and you have the neurotransmitters that kind of hang out in the middle that help connect that signal from one part of the nerve to the other part of the nerve. So it's really important because if we have inadequate levels of neurotransmitters, that can affect neurological impulses going from one part of the nervous system to the other. And dopamine is kind of that bridge. It really helps connect, for the nervous system. And so when you have very low dopamine issues, functionally low, obviously we have pathological low dopamine. That's going to be like Parkinson's disease. And that's because the substantia nigra, the part of the midbrain that produces dopamine, gets destroyed. There's some data like what's destroying it. There's some autoimmune connection. There's some toxicity connection for sure. The literature definitely supports that. We're looking at it more functionally, right? What are the big functional symptoms that we're going to see with dopamine problems? So we're going to see low motivation, right? Poor enthusiasm. We're going to see lack of focus. We're going to see being impulsive, right? Being overly emotional. It's that feel-good neurotransmitter. So it's going to allow you to feel that connection, that love. You get a DM on your Instagram or your Facebook, someone likes your post, that's a little dopamine hit. So concentration, focus, and then of course a big one that kind of derails a lot of things, cravings. So sugar cravings, sweet cravings, and it can even go higher to things like drugs, right? Cocaine, any kind of stimulant, that's going to definitely be impacted by your low dopamine levels. You're talking functionally low. We have the Parkinson's is more pathological. That's where they're going to give you like Cinemed or levodopa. We're talking about using nutrients to bump up dopamine levels. And so even with dopamine, I'll use like tyrosine or L-Dopa. I have a couple of products that I use, and L-Dopa is actually interesting, right? So dopamine in itself, typically comes from the L-tyrosine amino acid. We have stronger ones where we'll use like L-Dopa from like mucuna purines or velvet bean extract. The cool thing is your skin, the tyrosine or the melanin in your skin is actually made from tyrosine too. So dopamine also has a connection to your skin, which is kind of interesting. So skin health can even play a role with dopamine as well. And so when we look at that, dopamine gets impacted by stress. Dopamine will get funneled downstream to adrenaline and noradrenaline when we have chronic stress. I'll pull up an article on that to kind of show it. And so it can play, a big role with stress. It's kind of like progesterone and estrogen, right? Progesterone gets depleted downstream when a female is chronically stressed. And when that happens, that can create more estrogen dominance. So here's one article right here. I'll put it up here. So this kind of looks at the neurotransmitter. This is a ResearchGate article. So it looks at tyrosine. Tyrosine gets converted to L-Dopa. There's your dopamine. And then it can also go downstream. It requires, guess what? It requires vitamin C. And that adrenaline can also go downstream and to make adrenaline. So noradrenaline, adrenaline, or we could call it norepinephrine, epinephrine. Here's the interesting thing I wanted to highlight here. Look at this, S-adenylmethionine. This is kind of the thing that I was kind of highlighting here today when we talk about solutions is sulfur amino acids actually play a very important role in activating your dopamine to adrenaline. So when you're chronically stressed, you'll actually deplete a lot of these sulfur amino acids. So SAMe is one. SAMe actually can get made from methionine. You can also use cysteine or N-acetylcysteine to actually improve some of these levels. Let me find this one article here that I wanted to show y'all. See here, let me pull it up. So this was an interesting article here because it talks about glutathione and cysteine right here. So it talks about glutathione and cysteine. Then it talks about how glutathione and cysteine, and there's SAMe right there because these can convert into make SAMe as well. You can take SAMe, but it's more expensive. And then that will impact right here dopamine. So dopamine plays a big, big role in a lot of these sulfur amino acids. And then you look at a lot of the oxidative stress. There's a lot of studies looking at, for instance, NAC may support dopamine neurons in Parkinson's disease. And part of the reason why is because there's a lot of oxidative stress that's involved in destroying a lot of the parts of the brain that actually make these neurochemicals. I'll try to pull that article up right here. So it talks about right here. Where was it? Well, it was talking about some of the oxidative stress that actually impacts it. And it was right here, it was talking about the antioxidant levels really helped improve the substantia nigra and improved basically the dopamine production from the oxidative stress right there. So it plays a really important role in helping with glutathione. And glutathione plays a very important role in helping to actually make adrenaline. So the more you actually deplete your dopamine, the more you burn through your sulfur. Sulfur plays an important role with mood as well. So they're all intimately connected. Just wanted to, can make that connection there. So out of the gates, stress will chronically deplete that. Now the problem is then when you start to have more cravings, guess what you start to do? Eat more food. What does that food do that's more inflammatory and more processed? It actually furthers the whole depletion of dopamine. And then if you're not getting the right building blocks in, because a lot of these neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, they're amino acid based. They're made from amino acids. So if you don't get the right diet and food and nutrition in there, then you don't ever replete the levels, right? And so this is kind of this like vicious cycle that we're on. And when we look at the different things we can do to bump it up, I showed you like vitamin C plays an important role. B6 plays an important role. You're going to see things like sulfur amino acids play an important role because you're going to deplete those when you go into dopamine to adrenaline. But also, when we're under a lot of stress, the oxidative stress that can impact parts of the brain that make dopamine, they're oxidative sensitive, meaning when we have a lot of oxidation, a lot of free radicals, whether it's inflammatory foods, whether it's just needing extra antioxidants like vitamin C, like our master antioxidant glutathione, that's all made from cysteine and N-acetylcysteine. And so we need the big building blocks to buffer the oxidative stress. We have to get the nutrition in there to make it. Also, part of this whole stress, when we make all this adrenaline and we deplete our dopamine, what's being impacted there? We're stimulating a fight or flight response from our adrenal glands. So our adrenal glands are in this sympathetic state and we're depleting a lot of our brain chemicals because we're over secreting cortisol, over secreting adrenaline, and that's part of the whole adrenal cascade. And so the adrenals are intimately connected with the adrenaline. The adrenaline's made in the inner part of the adrenal glands. The outer part of the adrenal glands makes the cortisol, and so they both play a major role in connecting them. So when you have chronic dopamine issues, you have to look at the stress, you have to look at the inflammation, you have to look at how good is your diet. When you start to have a lot of the cravings and a lot of the mood issues, are you going to eat and consume more stimulants, more sugar, and more processed food? Or are you using supplements and nutrients and diet and lifestyle and healthy nutrition to get back on track? So that's really the most important thing. I'll put my coordinates down below if you guys want to reach out to myself and staff. We're happy to help you out worldwide on the functional medicine side to dive in deeper to get to a lasting solution. Let me hit a couple questions here for you. Okay, yeah. Dr. J, how come you're opposed to the use of Ritalin, methylphenidate, but not Provigil, modafinil? So anytime you use a medication like that, Ritalin's going to be a methylphenidate. That's like a methamphetamine. You can kind of put Adderall in that same camp. Um, Anything medication-wise, I think, is going to be whipping a tired horse. So like Dave Asprey was a big fan of Provigil or modafinil. He talked about getting through, I think, his MBA with that. I think if you use something like that, it has to be very, very acute. The problem when you do any medication like that, it tends to deplete your appetite. For me, when I used to do it a little bit in college to kind of study a little bit, I never liked how it felt. I always felt like afterwards, I felt like crap for a day or two. It caused a lot of appetite issues. And I wouldn't eat for like 12, 24 hours to get through my appetite off. So I'm much more in favor of using nutrients, B vitamins. You could even use safer smart drugs like paracetam. B vitamin B6 is really important. You could even use things like PQQ, CoQ10. I would even use things to increase ketones because ketones, I think, do play a really good brain stabilization effect on the brain and give your brain a really good energy source when you're studying for long periods of time. Even a little bit of caffeine, I think, is helpful. I'm not anti-Provigil. I should say I'm not pro-Provigil or anti any medication. I would just say not for any long-term use. If you're going to use it for a short-term period of time, I would be more for Provigil than for Ritalin just because of how I typically would feel if I were to use those medications. But someone may feel better than not. In the end, though, what happens with a lot of these stimulants, you end up needing more of a dose. And then you're just going to fry your neurotransmitters out. That's my concern. You're going to fry them out. What happens if you reintroduce foods too quickly after a prolonged fast? I mean, it just depends, right? I mean, like you got the extreme where you have concentration camp victims in World War II, where like the soldiers would go into these war camps, right? Auschwitz and the different ones, and they would like see these emaciated people and just like be like, hey, here's my candy bar, here's this. And they would like feed them and they would eat so much that they would actually die a couple days later because they overfed. So when you have someone that's incredibly starving, there's like this progressive, slow bit of nutrition that you have to add into the system, right? So you have that's on one extreme, and the other extreme is, you just did like an 18-hour fast, not a big deal. You would just look at how many calories you typically need for a day. Let's say it's 2,000. And you would say, okay, my window to eat is going to be 6 hours. So I'm going to eat at 12, eat again at 4, and then see where I sit around 6 o'clock and see if I want maybe a smoothie or something else to fill in my nutritional gap. Or maybe I was able to get enough of it in those 2 meals. So that's kind of on one spectrum is that. The other spectrum is, yeah, you gotta introduce it slowly. Oh yeah, so how to test for dopamine, right? How to test for these things is we can run organic acids and look at things like vanillin or homovanillate. We can even look at Dopac. So these are kind of organic acids that give us a window into what's happening with our neurotransmitters. That's a good one. I had a cauliflower, broccoli, garlic with NAC. That's good. Those are all good sulfur donors in there. Yeah, I mean, I think things like Ritalin or Adderall, they're just stimulants. They're going to impact brain development. I've seen some studies showing some not so good long-term data on brain development. So anything long-term use is not going to be good. I much rather use nutrients and some of the more safer, smart drugs that are out there. All right, guys, hope that helped. Any other questions, feel free and chime in. In general, get your diet right, get your lifestyle right. If you need natural stimulants, caffeine, tyrosine, dopamine, these are great. I'll even throw in some ginseng. Those are excellent sources. And when I do caffeine too, I think it's much better to throw caffeine with some kind of a ketone precursor like an MCT or a collagen, because I find that when it time releases the caffeine, doesn't make you as jittery or anxious. So you can get that caffeine in your system without the jitteriness. And then it's time releasing it a little bit. And then you're also, as you're increasing free fatty acid synthesis, which is what caffeine does, it's going to put more free fatty acids in the system. Now you're increasing the ketone precursors via the MCT. So now you have more brain fuel. And if you're keto adapted, your brain's going to use a lot of those ketones for fuel in the brain. So I hope that makes sense. All right, guys, links down below if you want to reach out. Hope you enjoyed today's stream. We'll be back here for a podcast in a little bit, y'all. Take care.